Hello everyone and welcome to Sparks and Quarks, a podcast all about science and engineering hosted by myself, Adam Gillard, and the great Mr. Dan Hanvey. Hello Dan.
Oh, hello Adam. That's a long time since I've been described as great. That was very flattering, thank you.
I'll tell you what Dan, to be honest though, you are pretty great, so I'm kind of surprised that it's been a long time since you've been described as that.
Stop it, I'm blushing. But speaking of long times, it's been a while, hasn't it?
Oh, it has. But then, to be honest, we've both been very, very busy people.
This is true. I mean, when was our last episode? It was definitely in 2018, because it's 2019, everyone. Happy
2019.
Happy New Year. It's definitely not February when we're recording this.
No, totally not February the 1st.
Yep.
No, not at all. But to be fair, we do have a very good excuse. Obviously, over Christmas, you were very busy. I was very busy revising, getting on. Then I had exams early January.
Yeah.
I had another deadline just after exams, and now this is the first weekend that I've actually been free.
Oh, pure freedom. Yeah, and then after Christmas, my body decided to break again, so I had to do some treatment at home at my parents' house before flying back to Denmark. And yeah, so between us, we've both been pretty jam-packed, and this is, so sorry about the delay, really, but we hope that we'll make up for it with the contents of this episode.
Well, hopefully, yeah. I mean, I know that me and you have both spoken. We're wanting to sort of increase the amount of recordings that we're getting in and episodes we're posting this year, and I think we've got some good potential things in the works for Sparks and Quarks, which
absolutely, sort of two ideas that we floated, and fingers crossed we'll pull them off.
Fingers crossed, yeah. But you know, they're a long way from actually happening yet. But yeah, I'm really excited for this.
Yeah, same. I think we've got a good year ahead of us. 2019 is going to be good.
Absolutely. Is there anything in particular that you'd like to share with the audience as to what you've been doing in the last couple of weeks, kind of thing?
Last couple of weeks, I mean, flew back to Denmark about 2 weeks ago. So got back to it, landed, and when I landed, it was all fine. It was a little bit chilly. I could see a bit of frost / sort of settled snow as I flew in, and it was very cold when I landed. And then I had my first Danish snow, which was absolutely lovely.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, I think I actually saw a picture on Facebook that you posted.
Yeah. It was, honestly, it was gorgeous. We had a good couple of inches, and it fell really quickly as well. Like
awesome.
I'm used to if we get a couple of inches in the UK, it's normally because it's fallen. There's been like an inch one day, and then it stayed cold, and then it's snowed overnight again. And it's built up. Whereas it was literally like a few inches over the course of about 4 hours.
Amazing.
And it just came down, and it made cycling a little bit interesting. There was one morning.
Yeah, I bet.
One morning, I got out of my flat, jumped on my bike, pedalled off, and my bike just went sideways underneath me.
Brilliant.
So I said,
exactly what you want.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I said, yep, this isn't happening. So I took it back inside and jumped on the bus because, of course, it's Copenhagen, Denmark. They're used to this. So their public transport doesn't grind to a halt when there's more than 5 millimeters of snow.
Wow. Just goes to show, really, doesn't it?
Exactly, yeah. But, yeah, unfortunately, it's pretty much all thawed now. It's still chilly, but I think there's more snow due. But I don't think it's going to be as much as we've had, or indeed as much as the UK's had.
Well, yes, it's funny that you speak of snow, actually, because here in Bristol, actually, today has been the first day that we've had snow. Mm-hmm. And we had heavy snowfall since about, it must have been around 7-8 o'clock last night. Mm-hmm. Started snowing. I went to sleep at about midnight. It was still snowing at that point. Woke up this morning. It was still snowing.
Wow.
Yeah, the view out of my window this morning was absolutely beautiful. I shared it on the Sparks and Quarks Instagram, actually, and on Facebook. So
yes, I remember seeing that now, actually. Yeah, I did look nice. I maybe missed the UK in snow.
Yeah, but I mean, honestly, I went out earlier on, and I'm not even joking, I was stood in a foot of snow.
Wow.
Yes.
I mean, it was... Sorry, we've as per, we are conventional Brits, so we are talking in depth about the weather. I mean, it was March last year. I remember it was the beast from the east when it snowed really heavily.
Yeah, it was. It was end of February towards March. Yeah,
and that was caused, as we know, by a splitting of the polar vortex. And I think just today, Simon's released another video on this latest cold snap. Well, more specifically, why sort of is it caused by climate change? Changed. Yeah,
it absolutely has changed, Dan.
It has changed indeed. So that's it's getting chilly, man. It is getting chilly.
It is indeed, yeah. But of course, global warming, that's about things getting hotter, right? So this can't be due to global warming.
If you say that again, I'm going to have to cancel this podcast and cancel you being my friend.
Of course, I was joking. Just to be clear, I do not want our readers thinking that I am a climate change denier. I am absolutely not.
Yeah, we vaguely understand the physics and we believe that it exists. So that's better than certain US presidents.
Donald Trump.
I mean, at this point, we don't even have to mask it.
Oh, no, we don't.
The
Donald
man's
Trump.
a denier.
You are an idiot.
And I'm sure that statement from this massive podcast with its huge following will have a huge impact on tiny hands.
Of course. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, I think, Dan, we should probably get on with a bit of the physics and the engineering for this podcast.
That's probably a good idea, given that's what we're primarily here for.
Yeah, so I mean, let's kick it off with your topic.
Absolutely. Okay, so I'd say, I've messaged you before about this. I am really excited about my topic, and I hope you get excited about it as I am.
Okay, I'm intrigued. You have my attention.
What if I told you that engineers had discovered a way to generate electricity using carbon dioxide and water, with the byproducts being hydrogen and baking soda? For
one, amazement.
Yeah.
For two, that's a great meme reference.
I'm so glad you picked up. Right. I found a news article on a scientific paper that was published in November of last year, 2018, called Efficient CO2 Utilization via a Hybrid NA CO2 System Based on CO2 Dissolution.
Okay.
So I'll be sort of using this article, but kind of paraphrasing bits of it and describing their setup.
Of course.
So Korean and US engineers have recently realized something. There's this well-known process of CO2 dissolving, that's what dissolution means, in seawater. It's why we call the oceans carbon sinks, because the CO2 literally dissolves into the water and removes it from the atmosphere. The trouble is, this dissolving of CO2 acidifies the ocean.
Right.
So before the Industrial Revolution, there was a really nice equilibrium. There was like a set amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, produced naturally through, animals and humans breathing and volcanic activity. But equally, the oceans were able to absorb a lot of it. And, they had a pH level that was pretty much set and all was good. Then, obviously, us humans came along. We started burning fossil fuels and pumping CO2 out like there was no tomorrow. Which, of course, if we keep up at this rate, there will be no tomorrow. And as a result, the increased atmospheric CO2, the equilibrium has now shifted. So the seawater is now more acidic because the oceans are absorbing more CO2 from the atmosphere.
Right.
And the paper I looked at actually said it was a 28.8% increase in hydrogen ions, so protons, which is
now that's fairly substantial.
Yes, it is. That's not a 28.8% increase in pH or acidity.
No.
That's just 28% increase in number of ions. So we'll cover that a bit later. So, speaking of acids, so thinking back to the days when you studied chemistry, I presume you studied chemistry at either A level or GCSE.
Oh, I did. GCSE, taking me all the way back. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. So if you remember, an acid is a molecule with the ability to donate a proton.
Okay, didn't know that.
Okay,
GCSE doesn't get you very far in chemistry, but
okay, that might have been taught to me in A level. I can't entirely remember. So when CO2 is dissolved in water, it forms carbonic acid, which is H2CO3.
Right.
Literally just combining the water and the CO2. But carbonic acid, in turn, can donate a proton and form a bicarbonate ion, which is HCO3 minus.
Okay.
So it's got a negative charge.
Sure.
There's also another equilibrium formed by donating another proton and forming the carbonate ion. So HCO3 minus becomes CO3 2 minus because it loses the other hydrogen atom that it has.
Yeah, sure.
So it gets a double negative charge.
Yep.
And then you obviously, as a result, you then have two hydrogen ions floating around. Now, that carbonate sort of equilibrium is much smaller than the bicarbonate equilibrium. That's what we're going to be concentrating on. But what it means is dissolved CO2 forms a solution with lots of positively charged protons floating around and the negatively charged bicarbonate ions. So the protons can attract electrons.
Yep.
And the engineers realised that this could form the basis of a battery, because if you have an ability to sort of attract electrons, if you attract them through a wire, that's an electric current.
Of course, yeah.
You've got power.
Yeah, sure.
So they designed this battery. So the anode is sodium metal, Na, placed in an organic electrolyte. The cathode is platinum, as in the expensive metal, placed in water. So the electrolyte of the water are prevented from mixing by a super-ionic conducting membrane, or what was it? I think it is because it's sodium, so it's NaSiCon or something. So it's like NaSiCon.
Right. Okay.
Which is a cool acronym.
Yeah, it is. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. So this membrane has a high ionic conductivity, but a low electrical conductivity.
Okay.
So what it means is, ions can move through it, but electrons can't.
Okay.
And the other reason that you have this membrane is because, as I said, the sodium catalyst is immersed in an organic electrolyte, and then you've also got water surrounding the cathode. Now, I can't remember what you remember of chemistry, but could you remember what happens when water comes into contact with sodium?
Yes. Yes, I can.
It's for those listeners or readers who don't know, it's what we call an exothermic reaction. Basically, sodium is a very reactive metal. If you add water to it, it has a single electron floating around its outer shell that is desperate to be free. You add it to water, it loses that electron, it heats up. It releases hydrogen from the water. It forms, I think, sodium hydroxide as a result. The heat from the reaction will often set fire to the hydrogen that's released, and you basically end up, if you have a little bit of sodium and you place it in a bowl of water, you end up with this bit of sodium skimming around the top of the water, sort of being
and it's sort of
propelled around.
It like spits around, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So basically you don't want your water on one side of the battery to come in contact with this sodium catalyst, because cathode, because bad times will occur.
Sure.
So, carbon dioxide gas, you may remember I mentioned it a while back.
You did indeed.
It's one of the gases we're concerned about for climate change, but we pump that into the water, and as I said, it will then dissolve. Not all of it will dissolve, but some of it will dissolve, and that forms an aqueous solution of carbonic acid in the water. And the equilibrium is then set up, so you also get the bicarbonate and the carbonate ions. So, an oxidation reaction occurs at the anode, and this reaction creates positive sodium ions from the sodium metal and electrons. Okay. So essentially, as I said, the sodium has a single electron in its outer shell, so the oxidation reaction occurs, and the electron is stripped away, and the sodium ion is then, positive charged sodium ion is just floating around.
Sure.
So the sodium ions will then pass through the ionic membrane, and the electrons obviously then can't go through the ionic membrane because it has a low electrical conductivity.
Of course, yeah.
So they pass through the cathode through a circuit which is then linked to the anode. Sorry, I've got that the wrong way around. Anode, cathode. Point is, the electrons will pass through a circuit. Hey, Presley, you've got a current. So the sodium ions... Exactly. The sodium ions are passed through the membrane, and they are then bonding with the bicarbonate ions that are formed by this equilibrium reaction in the water.
Okay.
So you've got positively charged sodium, negatively charged bicarbonate ions, and they bond, and that forms sodium bicarbonate, or as we more commonly know it, baking soda. So you have dissolved baking soda.
I tell you what, just on this topic, baking soda is absolutely amazing.
Right.
Honestly, it's one of the most amazing things ever. If you use it in any type of cleaning, it's the best. If you use it in any type of... actually, I'll give you a really good example of this. So, I am a Christmas tree farmer. My father... owns a Christmas tree farm.
I thought you were going to say my father was a Christmas tree father. His father before him was a Christmas tree father.
No, unfortunately not. My father's father was a sheep farmer. Rather different.
Still farming.
Yeah, of course. Anyway, so back last year, we actually had a fungal infection on a lot of the Nordman fir Christmas trees. And they are sort of like non-drop trees. And obviously, this isn't what you want. You do not want a fungal infection on a Christmas tree that you are getting ready to sell in 4 months' time.
Because I imagine that means that you're prevented from selling it.
Absolutely. And of course, you can't spray them with bad chemicals because that's going to kill the plant.
Yeah.
So what you do is you make a mixture of bicarb and water and spray it on the tree, leave it for a few days, spray it again, hey presto, fungus is gone.
There are so many uses for it. I mean, obviously in baking, but then, yeah, as you say, a fungal infection, that's a new one to me. I know that it can be used in cleaning. I'm sure that I've used it for treatment of some wound or something. I could be talking out of my arse there, but I'm sure I've used it for something
Probably
else.
not. It's absolutely amazing.
It's amazing stuff. So this battery forms aqueous baking soda, essentially, in the water. So the great thing is, the only recharging, in inverted commas, this battery needs is the replacement of the sodium anode.
Okay.
Because obviously you're stripping away sodium ions to create the sodium bicarbonate. So over time it will, reduce in size.
So am I right in saying relatively cheap?
Yes, relatively cheap and pretty plentiful as well.
Yeah.
And as long as you keep it away from water, it's safe.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So what that means is, as long as it has a supply of carbon dioxide gas and you swap out the anode when required, the battery can just keep running and running and running. And the testing, that sort of like the research that they've done, has showed stable operation over 1,000 hours.
That's pretty damn good.
Which is pretty good. Yeah, pretty good for a battery that they just went, well, let's see if this works.
Yeah.
You would have expected it to maybe run sort of like, I don't know, 100 hours, and then they'd see like a drop off on its stability or efficiency. But nope, 1,000 hours, still running happy.
Hang on a sec. Can I just ask you, Dan, how many times have you brought up a topic about batteries now?
I was wondering when you were going to mention that. Yeah, I've noticed I am not obsessed with batteries. It just so happens that there is some really, really interesting research coming out on them.
It suddenly occurred to me. I was like, hang on, batteries. Where have I heard that before? Oh, wait, honestly, this podcast many times.
I realised that as well. Like when I got to the end of my research, I was like, wait a second. I have talked about lipos. I've talked about lithium ion. I've talked about bacterial batteries. Yeah. I mean,
anyway, it's not a bad thing. Battery tech is a very big thing. So
absolutely, the future is looking more and more electrical. We need a way of storing that. Battery tech is all good. So on the subject of battery, so the cathode, the platinum cathode, doesn't need replacing ever because it's inert. Because the only thing that forms at it doesn't get used up, and it's hydrogen gas that forms at it, and it doesn't affect it in any way.
Of course, and obviously the reason why platinum is used in rings is because it's inert. You don't get any degradation over time, so hence it's good for rings. Exactly,
and you don't really want to be replacing a platinum, cathode or cathode too often because it's really expensive.
Well, yeah, of course.
And it was also shown that I've said that the sort of like the operation was stable, but also you would have thought, by pumping in CO2 into this water and acidifying it, you might have an issue with keeping the pH at a correct level. Nope. pH for the solution was stable over 1,000 hours as well.
Amazing.
So the reaction that was occurring at the right rate, and it's amazing. So testing shows that when producing 100 milliamps, now bear in mind
that's pretty good,
right? If you think back to the other batteries I've spoken about, we're talking like microamps or like 2 milliamps. We're talking 100 milliamps on this thing, and I've seen it. It's actually quite small. Like we're not talking you could fit it in your phone just yet.
No.
But it's significantly smaller than I was expecting. I was expecting something much larger.
Yeah, now you see, it's funny you say 100 milliamps because I was sort of thinking, right, so Dan's been excited about this one. this is something that he's wanted to talk about. I was thinking maybe like 1 milliamp because of the scales that we've had before, but 100 milliamps, that's really cool.
Yeah. Now, to get that, so it didn't actually say this in the article. I had to read through the scientific paper itself.
Sure.
And, I am an engineer / what was the phrase? Failed physicist, I think was the phrase used on stream by Simon.
Oh, I think it was, yeah.
So and there's a lot of chemistry in this one. So
I think that comment was induced by me as well.
I think it might have been, yeah.
Sorry, Dan. This is from the person who also has future prospects in their career or in the industry of engineering.
Yes, exactly. But hey, it's a great industry.
Yeah.
But so yes, I read through this paper, but and I was trying to remember back and remember bits of my education. But it's fairly complicated. It is a scientific paper, so I might have misunderstood the whole 100 milliamp thing. But it definitely said something about 100 milliamps, and there had been a CO2 conversion efficiency of 47.7%. So
That's
as I
not
understand it, that means that 47.7% of the CO2 that is pumped through the water is then converted to bicarbonate of soda.
Cool.
And so this is the bit that I was getting to the end of my research, and the authors included like an additional couple of pages that weren't in the main report,
right?
Of like tables and graphs and things.
Sure.
So I had looked through, and I got to one of the last tables. They made comparisons to other batteries.
Okay.
So, as I'm sure you know, typically we use milliamp hours as a measure of battery capacity. So, a battery with a 2,000 milliamp hour capacity could discharge 2,000 milliamps for an hour before it depleted,
okay, sure.
or 1,000 milliamps for 2 hours. Or it's roughly. There's a little bit more to it than that. That's roughly how it works.
Yeah.
So, for example, a lithium-ion battery. So the authors of this paper then made comparisons to other battery types, both kind of existing conventionally used, but also battery types that had been designed and proposed in various research papers.
Okay.
But they used gravimetric capacity, because obviously battery capacity changes with size. But if you say gravimetric capacity, i.e. milliamp hours per gram, you're measuring capacity per
Okay, so you're looking at
mass.
an energy density.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, so it's like an energy density. Yes. So for example, a lithium-ion battery was listed as having a gravimetric capacity of 225 milliamp hours per gram. Yeah.
Okay, 225. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this new CO2 battery was calculated. Now, bear in mind, this is a early stage, and I expect these numbers are kind of like ideal scenario. So expect them to drop a little bit. But even if they drop a little bit, I think they're going to be pretty good, because it was calculated to have a capacity of. Do you want to try and guess, or?
I'm ready. Now, you see, the way you're hyping this up, I'm thinking it's going to be something like 400?
210,000 milliamp hours per gram.
I'm sorry, what?
Right? You see why I was so hyped about this, and I've reopened the additional bit of paper. I'm scrolling back down to the thing. Gravimetric capacity, milliamp hours per gram. Lithium-ion battery, proposed by Wang et al. In 2012, 225. This work, 210,000.
I don't know what to say. I was thinking when you said, do you want to guess? I was thinking, right, should I go optimistic and think, oh, maybe like 1,000? Because I was thinking, that's probably going to be pushing it a bit. So I'd rather be lower, but 210,000.
That is magnitudes bigger.
That's incredible.
It's right. And so that's obviously the capacity. Then also we need to think about sort of discharge rates, because it's all well and good having a battery with a massive capacity, but if you're only able to discharge, like a milliamp in an hour,
sure, yeah, of course,
it's a bit useless. Well, it's not useless, but it's not got that many uses. So it also compares milliamps per gram, so the actual discharge.
Okay.
Per gram. So it has slightly lower current density than lithium ion. So lithium ion 280 milliamps per gram, this new CO2 battery, 200 milliamps per gram.
Okay, well,
so it is lower,
that's
not by much.
Still not bad, no, because obviously,
exactly.
If you've got this battery which is can't produce as big an output like at once, but has this much bigger density, if you put in two of them, then if you optimize this density and put in two of these batteries, then you're rolling.
Yeah, there are ways around it. Yeah, and unless you need something with like a high capacity output, like something with a very like a DC motor or something,
Sure.
Something that has a massive current draw on startup.
And obviously stuff like that, and I know that lasers as well. Obviously,
yes,
handheld lasers, they are very limited by the output energy density of a battery.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So all in all, it's pretty impressive, pretty incredible. So essentially, it's a battery that uses that pesky carbon dioxide that we humans keep pumping out to generate power, and then you can use the hydrogen and the bicarbonate of soda that you generate to make a cake to celebrate your new source of clean energy.
Amazing.
I mean, this thing... So I understand it's early days. I understand it's a scientific paper, but it's not a theoretical thing. You know, they actually built this thing, a little desktop model, and tested it and measured it, and it's so cool. It's so cool.
I'm still just a bit blown away by the sheer amount of how much bigger than I thought it would be.
Yeah, like again, it's not often like, so for example, when we're doing this podcast, when you say, you know, when you say like a cool fact or something, and I go, oh, I should, I'm going to look into that. I tend to look into it, but if it's something, if it's a topic that I've researched, I tend not to look too much. I tend not to look back over them too much, because I figure, I've looked into that. Like, I'd rather look at the next thing. I'm going to be looking this thing up more. Like, I'm going to be speaking to people, and people have a better understanding of chemical engineering than I do, and saying, can you read this paper? Tell me what you think. Like, have I overhyped it? Have I misunderstood something?
Yeah.
Or does this have, really good potential?
Now, I'd quite like to look at this paper as well, so I'm sure you're going to put the links in the show notes, but
oh, absolutely. Yeah,
I definitely want to have a look at this, because I want to see these graphs of these outputs.
Yeah, I know. So the graphs are one of the things that have there are obviously various graphs that they've put in, and there are some of them that have stumped me. So I need to that's where I need someone with a bit more of understanding.
Sure.
To explain, but it's if it's like, even if it's just a fraction of what I understand it as, it's incredible.
Yeah,
absolutely
incredible.
Incredible.
Really is great topic, honestly.
Thank you.
Really cool.
Like, as I said, I kind of found it the other day, and I was like, oh yeah, that looks pretty cool, and I did more research into it and went, oh my god, this is awesome.
And I tell you what, that's another benefit as well, is actually looking at the papers and
yes.
trying to look through those, even if it's only skim reading, because the papers can have so much more information than an article can. And
oh, absolutely.
I must admit, for this podcast, I do regularly just stick to the article, and I don't really dive into the papers much, just because I don't really have time to.
Yeah, that's fair. I was lucky in that I had the time to look into it more in this one, and I'm glad I did.
Yeah, and I mean,
I just wish I understood more.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, is that obviously because I'm on a very heavy science degree, I do physics, and I'm constantly having to write sort of papers just to assign, as assignments for my lab work. I've got to constantly be looking at papers, sort of understanding the style and looking at these things and trying to replicate them in my own sort of way. So reading papers, honestly, and this is, if you don't read papers, honestly, have a look. Just have a search, Google Scholar. It will be your best friend. Just search something that you think you might be interested in, and just have a scroll through. The titles are normally long enough that you can get a good enough grasp of what's contained, and then just read the abstract. And if you think that you might like it, then hopefully you'll be able to access it. Now, some of it's paid, but some of it's not. So
yeah, and the good thing about this one, I'm just double checking. Yeah, it's an open open paper,
Brilliant.
so anyone can read the paper in detail.
Yeah, and I mean, quite often they will be, especially if articles on popular sort of news websites have shown them. They'll quite often be free, but sometimes they're definitely not. But yeah, awesome.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, yeah, look into it. I am hoping that this, as I said, I'm really hoping this takes off, because it has huge implications for both our power consumption and if we're, carbon capture technologies are taking off. But it's the question has always been, well, what do we do with it? And there's been suggestions of pump it into the ocean or pump it underground. And well, if we pump it into water and make power out of it, that's the solution.
Well, yeah. I mean, it obviously these things they're so incredibly complex, but but yeah, absolutely. If that's a potential solution, then I mean, a lot of the solutions that I've seen floating around for at least actually offsetting our carbon output are incredibly expensive. And will cost the Earth sort of trillions of dollars to do over the entire Earth. But obviously, if these things can be made a lot cheaper through these processes, then that's just incredible.
Yeah, exactly. Very, very excited.
Cool.
So yeah, that was my one. What have you got for this week? This month.
Yeah, this month,
whatever
week,
schedule we're on.
No, this episode. Let's go with that.
Yes, this episode.
So, this episode, I'm going to be talking about a new mechanism that's been found within the inner ear.
Ooh.
So yeah, obviously, this is specifically looking at human ears. So a bit of biology on this one, actually, but also a bit of physics as well.
Okay. Yeah.
So obviously, with the ear, you have sort of three main sections. You have the outer ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear. Now, just to sort of lay out the groundworks for the ear, in the middle ear, you have the auditory canal, which then leads to the tympanic membrane, also known as the eardrum.
Oh, I thought it led to Liverpool.
Oh, that would be a...
Oh wait, that's the Liverpool Manchester ship canal. My bad.
Bit different. Anyway.
A little bit different.
Then the eardrum interacts with the malleus, the incus, and the stapes, which then goes on further to the inner ear, where it interacts with the cochlea, and finally to the auditory nerve, straight to the brain.
I hope all of our readers are taking notes. There will be a quiz at the
Absolutely. No, so we will get to know. We're going to hear a lot more about the cochlea in this one specifically.
Well, that works then. If we're going to hear about it,
yes, we're not going to see any of it, but yes, no hearing. Haha, gotcha.
Haha, terrible joke.
Absolutely. Anyway, so we know the human ear is incredibly sensitive to noise because obviously we can hear very slight whispers, and we can even make our hearing very selective. So obviously, if you're in a group of people, you can focus on specific noise. You can tune into what a certain person is saying and not tune out of what another person is saying. Now,
sorry, what were you saying? I wasn't listening.
Very funny. What's it with the bad jokes this week, my friend?
I'm sorry. I am going to have to hold back because, the opportunity for jokes in this one is
don't
just
hold back,
too
please.
much.
Please don't hold back. Anyway,
sorry. Carry on.
So, the way we hear sound is that sound waves enter our ears, interact with the eardrum, causing incredibly small vibrations that translate through the malleus, incus, and the stapes through to the cochlea, where the sound waves are translated into a type of wave that oscillates in a sort of, let's go with up and down motion along something called the basilar membrane. Basilar membrane. There we go. Let's go with that.
That is definitely like a retired colonel somewhere.
I mean, it's either basilar
membrane.
or basilar, or I don't know. Anyway. And that in turn stimulates the sensory hairs that transmit the sound to the brain. So, back in 2007, a mechanism of another structure within the cochlea called the tectorial membrane was discovered, which essentially transmits energy to different parts of the cochlea via a side-to-side oscillating wave, which also interacts with the sensory hairs and enhances specific sounds.
Okay, so previously we've thought that sound was transmitted from our ears to our brains essentially by this sort of up and down motion that affects the hairs in our ear. But back in 2007, they discovered this side to side.
Well,
and
no,
that's
it's funny because we still have this sort of up and down oscillating motion which acts with the basilar membrane, but we also have this side to side oscillation which interacts with the tectorial membrane. Now, new research from MIT, led by someone called Jonathan Sellen, and Dennis Freeman, have finally found what the actual importance of this membrane is, because after that research was done, it was like, okay, this is important, we know it's there, we know it's important for human hearing, but what on earth does it do? We don't know. So, the tectorial membrane lies on top of the sensory hairs, which I mentioned earlier, and the hairs are sort of arranged in sort of individual tufts that are sensitive to different frequencies. So you may have one tuft of hair which is responsible for a frequency band of, I don't know, 10,001 to 10,025 hertz. Let's go with that.
Are they that narrow, or have you just?
I don't know how narrow they are. They could be more narrow, less narrow. I don't know, because I do not know the numbers of sort of how many of these nerves we have in our cochlea. But obviously, human hearing ranges from about 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. So
give or take, and accounting for age.
Absolutely, yeah. But I mean, obviously, it's got to be a fairly narrow frequency band, because we can tell the difference between a lot of different frequencies. So, these hairs are actually embedded into the tectorial membrane, which means that there's a very strong influence on what we hear through the interactions of the tectorial membrane.
Yes, makes sense.
So, the membrane itself is made of about 97% water, acts almost like jelly, and has many pores which are arranged in such a way that they affect how the gel moves sort of inside the membrane itself, with the vibrations of the sound that we hear. So what this does is, initially this membrane caused a lot of confusion, because it's the exact same thing where you would sort of expect, if you had a membrane over your microphone, you probably wouldn't be able to hear anything. It would just cause muffling. But obviously it's the physical structure of the membrane which allows it to do its job incredibly well. And it's these pores, interestingly, which are so important. Now, the positioning and sizes of these pores actually allow the gel within the membrane to sort of act with different viscosities, depending on sort of the size and the position of the pores. So if you had two pores that were, for example, extremely close together, that may cause it to act a bit more like a solid than a liquid, which is obviously interesting because it's 97% water. So the structure, interestingly, also moves as a liquid for sort of middle audio frequencies, so around 10 to 15,000 hertz, but acts actually more solidly for high and low frequencies, which is incredibly interesting, because what that means is that it enhances central frequencies.
Oh, okay.
Now, of course, this actually makes a lot of sense, since voices of the human species include more central frequencies than low or high ones. So essentially what this tectorial membrane is allowing us to do is cut out noises that we don't necessarily need to hear. So if you think about it, like when you're having communication with another human, are you sort of more wanting to hear this person talking with their sort of central frequencies, or are you wanting to hear the high-pitched squeal of a bird in a tree?
I mean, it depends whether you're an ornithologist or not, but you'd be wanting to hear the person talking.
Exactly. I mean, I don't know what that word was you said, but if I was one of those people, then I would feel rather rude.
Ornithologist.
An ornithologist. Okay. Didn't know that was a name.
Yeah.
But anyway, so this research is really interesting, and it's aiming to learn enough about the structure to actually implement new technology into hearing aids. So cochlear implants, so actually making a new biological cochlea based on these two membranes, and actually sort of implanting it into a deaf person's ear to actually allow them to hear again.
Ah.
Which I think is really cool, because obviously at the moment you have a few sort of types of hearing aids are implants directly into the bone structure, just sort of allowing the vibrations to be more pronounced, which helps hearing. And obviously normal hearing aids as well, they induce I believe they induce a sort of heavier impact on the eardrum, and sort of do the same thing. They allow the bones to work better. But when we're sort of talking about these the problems with the cochlea in particular, it's actually really hard to make a hearing aid for these problems, because we don't really understand the cochlea that well, which now we understand it a lot better. So in general, this membrane, the tectorial membrane, is actually incredibly hard to study because of its size and how fragile it is.
Yeah, because it's the ear that has the smallest bones in the human body, isn't it? Is that part of the cochlea?
Yeah, I believe that is the stapes, I think. Or it's part of sort of the malleus, incus, and stapes structure. So yeah, incredibly small. But actually, the pores on the tectorial membrane are actually on the nanoscale.
Oh wow! Okay.
So they're around 1,000 times smaller than a red blood cell. So actually knowing they're there in the first place, it just must have been incredibly difficult, because obviously, when you get down to wavelengths that small, you can't see them with visible light.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact that they actually have an effect on how we hear as well. It's like something that small affects us.
And that's why it was such a struggle at first to sort of understand what it was this tectorial membrane did, because it just seemed like some sloppy bit of jelly that laid on top of things and for some reason didn't muffle things.
Sorry, I'm thinking of Trump again. I have no idea why. Floppy bit of jelly laid on top of things.
Oh,
seems to muffle things.
Yeah, that does rather sound like Trump, doesn't it?
Sorry, easy and cheap shot, but I'll take it.
Absolutely. Yeah, but that's actually it for me today. It's a bit of a shorter one again. But like I said before, I haven't had a whole lot of time because of exams and deadlines and such.
Yeah, absolutely.
But obviously, the links to that one will be in the show notes. I've got direct link to the paper, which actually is, I believe, open source as well.
Excellent.
Then there's two articles which I based that on as well, and they'll both be in the show notes too. Now, I've actually got something else as well, which is just a couple of updates from the last few episodes, really. So it's just a couple of very interesting things that I came across in doing this research. Was obviously last time we spoke about the Young's double-slit experiment.
I remember, yeah.
Now there's been a new variation of this experiment which has been researched at the moment, and it uses X-ray scattering rather than photon scatter or normal visible light photon scattering. And there are some really cool insights in it. I'll let you guys read about that at your own will. But again, links to that one will be in the show notes. And interestingly as well, there has been an AI used to create the most accurate black hole merger simulation ever. Which I thought...
Now that
as an example, because we spoke about AI in episode 4, I believe.
Yes, that sounds about right.
3 or 4, and so this is obviously looking at more of the applications of AI in science, and how it's incredibly useful in figuring out how stuff in the universe works.
That sounds really cool. I will definitely, obviously, I'll be looking up the other stuff that you've spoken about, but I'll definitely be looking into that one.
Yeah, sorry if I went a bit fast there. I feel like I may have.
No, absolutely fine. I kept up and understood.
But yeah,
so.
readers, if you're listening and I'm going a bit too fast, just knock it down to 0.7 times speed. How about that?
Just slow it down.
Slow down. No, I sound like Dory.
What are you doing her whale talk bit? Right.
Anyway.
So, yeah, I think we've chosen two pretty good topics this week, actually. This week? I keep saying this week. What? We might get it to weekly. You never know.
We may. I think it's going to be a while from now. Maybe in summer. Over summer, I think it will be available to do it weekly.
That'd be good. But either way, we've chosen two pretty good topics this episode. So I spoke about a new type of battery that's powered by carbon dioxide. That the numbers. Yeah, I know, a battery again. But the numbers are showing it to be, compared to conventional batteries, really good and potentially a way of storing our excess carbon dioxide. Well, not storing, reusing.
Yeah. And I obviously spoke about the inner ear mechanism of the tectorial membrane, and how researchers have found that it's actually very, very useful for our hearing.
Yeah, nice bit of biological physics there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I liked it.
Thank you for joining us for our brief delve into the world of science and engineering. If you're interested in learning more about either of the topics we've discussed, the links will be in the show notes.
Alternatively, if you'd like to contact us, our email is sparksquarks@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you.
You can also find us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at SparksQuarks, and soon to be YouTube.
Ooh, coming soon, TM.
Coming soon.
That's it from us.
See you next time. So, thank you guys for joining us for our brief...
You're doing well.
Every time we do that, I get it wrong, don't I?
You're doing really well this time. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us in our...
Well, all I want to say is thank you for giving me material to stick at the end of the episode.
Oh.